Hi, Lee here. So if you remember from last video, I was just sanding down the neck. I cut the headstock out, and this video is about putting the frets in. Just for testing, I put one fret in just at the end, just to get my technique right. However, what I thought I might do, and I don't know if this is correct or not, but I thought before I put the rest of the frets in, I'm actually going to oil the neck because it's nice and smooth, and I figured if I could put some oil on there to try and protect it a bit while I'm hammering and punching frets in, then that might sort of save me some work later because it might harden the wood enough to stop damage. So if you see, I've got the flame pattern on there, which is really nice. But let me move the camera down and give you a closer look at what I'm going to do. So there's always lots of talk online about what to do to finish a neck. Now, a lot of the manufacturers' guitars, they put sort of the polyurethane finish on there, or in some cases maybe a nitro style finish. On my necks, I really much prefer to have that sort of wooden feel and look to them. That's just my preference. I find any of those other finishes tend to get sticky when your hand gets sweaty and I can't move my hand around the fretboard properly. Whereas I don't find that happens with oil. However, I've tested a lot of different oils on scrap pieces of maple just to see the one that least colours the wood, because I like the flame and I don't want too much colour going into this lovely coloured maple. And the one that I've tested quite a bit and I really like is, this is the one I use, is a Colour-On. It's a refined, they call it finishing oil, but it's got tung oil in it and resins. And it dries extremely fast and it dries hard, but it still feels like wood. So I really like this stuff. Now, I'm sure there's lots of people online who say, oh, you can't use this or that. This is the one I like, this is the one I'm going to use, and if you wanted to give it a go, at least in the UK, it's easy to pick up from B&Q or any of those hardware stores. So quite simply, I'm not going to do a full job on this. It is just to harden it very slightly, so I'm just going to put a very thin coat of oil, and I just use a tissue paper to apply it, and literally I'm just going to put it on. So I can already see it really bringing the flame grain out. I hope you can see that on the camera, but it looks absolutely amazing. I'm so happy with this neck. It's a real nice piece of wood, especially for the price I paid. So I think I'm going to use that company again. But as you can see, I don't know the best way to put oil on, but I'm just pushing away from the fretboard. It's got a maple fretboard, but I've actually masked the fretboard off. I don't want to put oil on that just yet, and I'm not sure I will at all. So I'm just pushing away from that, off the masking tape that I've already covered the fretboard with. Right, so that's it for now. I'm just going to leave that dry. And like I say, this dries really quickly and it forms quite a nice hard coating, but it doesn't feel like it's a resin or an oil. It still feels quite natural to me. And it doesn't go sticky when you sweat. So I really like this stuff. But they do a couple of different types, but I quite like this one with the tung oil in it. So I'm just going to leave that now. We'll come back later and we'll start putting the rest of the frets in. So that coat's now dry. I'm just going to rub it down very lightly with a piece of very fine sandpaper. I think this is 1200 grit. So just going to rub it down slightly and then I'll put another coat on it. So that already feels really, really smooth, so I'm pleased with that. What I'll do now is I'll just put another coat of oil on it. Even after I've put the frets in, I'm going to go back over this again with the oil, but I just thought if I can make it a little bit harder now before I do the fret work, it might give it some protection while I'm banging around. So that should do for now. I'm going to let that dry again and then we can start the fret work. So because I'm impatient and I'm still waiting for my sort of fret press tool to come, it's just an add-on for the clamp, I thought I'd make my own. So what I've done is I've taken a block of wood just so I can slide my radius into it. I've also just made a nice soft block of wood behind with some sponging so I don't damage the neck. So what I'm hoping is if I cut a fret, line it up, get it started, and then I use this to clamp down on it, hopefully that should work okay. Now I've not tested this yet, so let's give it a go and see if it works. If not, I will just have to wait for my proper tool to arrive and make sure I can do it properly. So what I'll need to do first is cut myself a piece of fret wire, and then I'm going to remove some of the tang just on the edges so it doesn't overhang, so I found this much easier then. Now you probably don't really have to if you don't have any sort of extra border around the neck, but what I've found is when I try to file down to make it nice and smooth, to sort of roll the edge a bit, the tang still sticks out and it's really hard to get rid of without damaging the wood. So that's the reason, as soon as I've cut this fret to length, I'm going to actually remove the edge of the tang on either side as well, just so it should make it easier just to smooth it off. So let's try that now. So that fret looks good. I'm just going to nip the ends of the tang off as well if I can. I did actually have a look online for a tool to do this to make it much easier, but they're just so expensive. I'll see if I can do it without first of all, but if not I might end up ordering something. So that seemed to work okay. So that's the tang removed. Hopefully it won't overlap. It still does slightly, so I'm just going to remove a little bit more. So hopefully that looks about right. I've bent it up a little bit there at the end, but that should be fine because that's way off the fretboard, and I'll trim that down when I cut the fret to size against the fretboard. So hopefully that looks okay. So now I'll see if I can try and press this fret in. So that seems to have worked okay. It looks like it's in. Let me just do this side as well, just to make sure it's pushed in firmly. If I have to, I might tap it in a bit more. But if this works, hopefully I won't damage it. So I'm reluctant to tap it with a hammer. I know that's the traditional way to do it, but I'd prefer not to. So that seems to be in okay. It looks pretty good. So that looks pretty good to me. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but it looks like it's in firmly. It's nice and curved to the radius of the fretboard. I think we're okay with that. So all I do now is I'll just nip these ends off. What I've done is I've actually ground down these end nippers, so I ground down the end of it so it's flat. So these are just regular ones, but I've got a grinder and I just grind the end down to make them flat to get as close to the fretboard as I can. So that looks really good actually, I'm pleased with that. So a combination of light tapping and my clamp seems to work okay. So I'll carry on with this and we'll see where we get to. So just so you know, this particular file, a little modelling file, obviously it's got the file edges on the flat, but this edge is actually smooth so it won't damage the fretboard. Now I'm going to do this properly later, but I'd just like to take the main edge off now, but obviously when I do all the frets properly, I'll mask up in between all of the frets so I don't ruin the fretboard. But for now this is smooth and it just means I can just do a quick on the edges, just so I don't cut my fingers on it while I'm working along because they're still quite sharp. So I've finally got my new clamp tool, which I've just put a block of wood on the end. This makes it much easier to clamp the fret in, and I do it quite softly so I don't damage any of the neck. As you can see, I've already done quite a few with this and it works really well, so I'm really happy with that. It's just a small tool that holds these radius pieces in. I also got some more radius pieces of various different sizes as well, just to make sure in the future I'll be able to do all sorts of radius sized guitars. And I also got a small fret hammer as well. It's just a soft end. I've got a big rubber mallet that you've seen me been using, but that's a bit overkill. So this small fret hammer just helps a bit where there could be a slight issue just getting one of the frets down. So I'll carry on doing this and hopefully I'll be finished quite soon. There's only got a few more frets to go. So that's all the frets put in now. It looks pretty good. They're all flat. I'm just going to go over them again. Obviously I've masked off the fretboard now because I'm going to go over all of the edges, roll the end of the frets to make them nice and smooth. But this is the best fret job I've done so far. It looks pretty good. So what I noticed on some of my old guitars, now I've gone back through them, when I put the frets in, I had to do a lot of fret levelling and it was really laborious and the end result wasn't perfect. Now I've had a look at those guitars again to see what I was doing wrong. It looks like it only takes a few of the frets to be sort of a bit too high and it can throw everything out when you're trying to level them up. So there's a couple of things I'm going to do. First of all, before I start filing a fret, if one seems to be too high, I'm going to actually hammer it in more to make sure it's completely flush to the fretboard wood itself. Because I've noticed when I look really carefully, some of the frets are actually sticking up slightly. I mean, it's barely perceptible, but you can just see it if you look carefully. So before I do any filing of frets that are high, I'm actually going to hammer them in more just to see if that's all the issue actually is. The other thing is, when I was doing the levelling, obviously with your fret levelling tool, you only ever go over 3 frets to level each one next to each other. Now, I didn't pay attention to the level of the whole fretboard as I went along, so that's something else I'm going to do. I'm always going to check a straight edge against the whole of the fretboard in the centre and each of the edges, just to make sure that any levelling I'm doing does work for the entire fretboard. I always want, obviously, the first and the last frets to be level with each other, as well as all of them in the middle being levelled correctly. So they're the two main things. I'm going to hammer them in rather than just filing them down, unless I have to do the filing. But every time I do any levelling of any of the 3 in combination of 3, I'm always going to keep one eye on checking the level of the whole fretboard to make sure everything in general looks good. So let's get on and start filing these down and see if we can get it as straight and as level as possible. Now I'm just going to start filing down the ends of the frets and then I'll do some fret levelling. So I've got all my tools I need. A small hammer. So I want to just double check hammering a fret down before I start filing it. This is actually my sharpening plate for my planer blade. But what I might try and do with this is just to finish it, because it's really fine, I can just rub it along the edge just to sort of finish the ends of the frets. Obviously fret level, fret file, and I've got a fret rubber here as well, just to get rid of the file marks and make the frets smooth again. So I might as well just kick off with this. So what I'm going to do is, these are the smallest frets, it's different sizes on this. So I just use the smallest one for the frets I've got, and I'm just going to go over all of the ends of the frets. I'm trying to keep it exactly the right angle. One thing I forgot to mention, after I put the frets in, I actually put a little tiny drop of glue into all of the gaps, just to try and seal it up. Now I don't know how true it is, but obviously online a lot of people are saying if you use a guitar a lot and you sweat a lot, it just stops any moisture and dirt getting in between the frets. So each one of these, I put a little drop of super glue just to seal it. What I'm also thinking of doing as well is, rather than oiling the actual fretboard itself, I might actually just put a thin layer of polyurethane on there, so just like a wood protector film, and then I'll just rub down the frets again once that's done, but I'll check that out later. I'm not entirely sure yet. So that feels pretty good, so let's just go along and start levelling some of the frets. So what I'm doing is I'm actually just going over multiple frets. The reason I'm doing this is I just want to see if, rather than doing in groups of 3, which I'll do a bit later on, I'm just trying to double check just to make sure there's no really obvious odd frets, and it's quite easy to do if you cover lots of a few more frets at once, because if you get a rock on a few more, you know one of them is going to be unusually high. So that's why I'm using this across multiple frets. So I've gone over this over and over again now, and I just can't get it any straighter than it is. So everything feels smooth. I've checked each individual fret for height. I've checked longer sections of frets. I've checked all along the length of the frets as well. I just don't think I can get this any straighter. This is as good as I'm going to get it. So what I'll do now is I will take the masking tape off. I'll polish up the edges just so I give them a very light sand down just on the edge of the fretboard from where I've been doing the work, and put another coat of oil on it and a sand down as well. So let's do that now. Hopefully this is as good as it's going to get, and let's oil up the neck and we'll start thinking about construction.